Hey there everyone, welcome to Tales in Texan. I'm your host Nisha and welcome to another book review. So in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Irawati Karve's Yuganta. Any of you who are watching this video follow the Mahabharata very closely, or for example, you follow my videos very closely on the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, or you love to read the epics and you have been reading the epics for a very long time, and more importantly you are interested in the deeper themes and the complex thought structures, the socio-cultural aspects, the political aspects, the entire historical anthropological aspects of the Mahabharata, then you might have come across this book Yuganta. You might have heard of it, you might have even read it. Irawati Karve's book is a seminal piece of literature in India, especially when it comes to analyzing the themes in the epics, and it is one of the go-to books when people want to critically engage with the themes in the Mahabharata. Now, Irawati Karve, I'm just going to read out her biography over here so that we have a little bit of context as to who she is and where she comes from. So, Irawati Karve was born in 1905 and she was born in Burma and educated in Pune. And she has got a master's degree in sociology from Bombay in 1928 and a doctoral degree in anthropology from Berlin in 1930. And this began her really distinguished career as an academician and researcher. She wrote extensively in both Marathi, which is her mother tongue, her native language, and also in English. Yuganta is one of the most widely read, having been translated into multiple languages and having been read for a very long time since the time of its publication. When she started writing this book, she in fact started writing a book on the Mahabharata, or the essays on the Mahabharata, because a friend questioned her about something in the Mahabharata, and it took Irawati by surprise that there are people asking these questions, and that made her realize that, okay, you know what, I think there has to be someone to kind of fill in these critical gaps, these theoretical gaps, which will help answer a lot of the unanswered questions that are there in the Mahabharata. And as she wrote one, that essay was really well received, and soon, as they say, it's history, and she'd written enough essays to compile them into a book. And one of the things that Irawati Karve makes very clear in her introduction is that her goal through this book is not to convince readers to adopt the beliefs and the perceptions and the ideas that she has. Rather, she wants to encourage people to question and debate and even disprove her theories by actually going ahead and reading the Mahabharata, especially the BORI Critical Edition. Because one thing Irawati Karve mentions in the introduction to this book is how disappointed she is that younger generations of Indians, and I'm talking about the time when this book was published, which was in the mid to late 90s, and even at that point in time, Irawati Karve felt that not a lot of youngsters were actually picking up the epics, and they weren't really engaging with them. If they were just believing whatever their elders and their priests and everybody else had to say, but nobody was actually digging deep, looking at the critical resources and actually reading these materials for themselves. So one of the main goals, or rather the primary goal of this book, according to Irawati Karve, is to encourage people to actually go ahead and read the epic. And to do so, she has let's put it this way, a lot of the opinions that she has some of them are quite out there, some of them are really interesting, and I actually do subscribe to some of these views. And some of her opinions is something that I don't believe. As someone who's reading the critical edition, I don't find them sort of aligned to the way I'm thinking, the way I perceive the themes in the Mahabharata. But you know what, that is exactly what Irawati Karve wanted to do. She wanted to challenge her readers so that they can go ahead and explore the critical edition themselves. And so with that in mind, let's dive into the review. Now, this book, as I mentioned, is Irawati's perspective about the Mahabharata. The opinions that I share are my perspectives about the Mahabharata, and I would love to hear your perspectives on the Mahabharata through the comments down below. Alright, so let's dive right in. So Yuganta is actually a collection of essays. We have a chapter on Karna, we have a chapter on Drona and Ashwatthama, we have a chapter on Krishna, we have a chapter on Yudhishthira. So you get the drift, right? So you have individual essays dedicated to specific characters and the people that orbit their universe and the specific themes that their life stories evoke. I will just provide you a quick glossary of contents. Okay, so you have the final effort, which is actually about the war and which is about Bhishma. The final effort, which is about Bhishma's role as an elder in the Kuru clan, and also in his role in his final attempt to prevent the war between the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Then we have about Gandhari. Irawati Karve imagines what it must have been like for young Gandhari to be taken to Hastinapura by Bhishma. Basically, she is not given a choice as to who she is supposed to marry, because Bhishma brings a very large army to intimidate the Gandhara king. And then he takes her with him, and after she reaches there, it is only then that she finds out that Dhritarashtra is blind. So it brings up a lot of questions of consent, of lying to achieve one's end goal, and it also brings up questions of disability and the and why society finds it very hard to kind of imagine that even people with disability deserve romance, deserve companionship, deserve marriage, and a fulfilling familial life. And through this, we also we can kind of question in terms of, or this is the themes that I kind of picked up. Although the whole disability angle is something that Irawati Karve does not touch. She speaks mostly from Gandhari's lens as to having been cheated and how she makes her peace with her life going forward. After the second chapter on Gandhari, we have the chapter on Kunti. Then Kunti's, basically we look at Kunti's childhood, and Iravati also hypothesizes what Durvasa's boon might actually have been about, and there are some really interesting and I think quite reasonable hypotheses made, but which are also quite extreme in terms of the fact that I don't think a lot of very traditional readers of the Mahabharata will accept it, because it puts Durvasa in a very negative light. So I'm not going to give you spoilers, but it's a very interesting read as to how or what her role in serving Durvasa might have been, and how Karna's birth came about in the first place. So that is a very interesting discussion. Then we have a very interesting chapter after Kunti's chapter titled Father and Son. And initially I thought it was going to be something like Pandu's relationship with his sons, or Dhritarashtra's relationship with his sons, or Vyasa and Bhishma's relationship with their sons, but it turns out that's not what this chapter is about. In this chapter, and I think this is the only place where I'm going to give a tiny bit of spoiler, Irawati Karve explores the possible relationship of how Vidura could have been Yudhishthira's biological father. And it is such a beautiful and thought-provoking essay that I feel like everyone who's interested in the Mahabharata has to absolutely read it, because it really throws up a lot of practical solutions to the issues that the people were facing at that time. So practical issues of why Pandu may not have been able to consummate his marriage, of why Kunti needed Niyoga, and what does the symbolism of calling down the gods actually mean, and can there be, in a very realistic setting, if it's not through adoption, it's not through IVF, if it is through biological means and the husband is unable to perform, then it only stands to reason, 2 plus 2, I'm sure you're able to answer that one on your own. So it's a very, very interesting and thought-provoking and beautiful essay, and it is also a very touching essay in terms of how Yudhishthira and Vidura's relationship, as depicted in the critical edition, is explored. Now, as you know, I'm still reading the 6th volume in the critical edition, so I haven't actually come to the part where a lot of Vidura's interaction with Yudhishthira actually takes place. There is some that takes place initially when the Lac Palace is about to be burned, when Vidura sends a message to Yudhishthira. Then there's also to save them, and then there's also Vidura's interaction with the Pandavas when he's trying to protect Draupadi, when Dushasana is trying to molest her and take away her sari. So apart from that, according to this book, there is a lot more of interaction between the two post the war, when the three elders, Dhritarashtra, Kunti, and Gandhari, decide to go into the Vanaprastha ashrama. So at that time, Vidura also joins them. So it's after that then that you kind of see the relationship between Yudhishthira and Vidura. So it's a very interesting essay. Then we have the essay on Draupadi, where we explore, where interestingly, Irawati Karve has chosen an interesting theme to actually weave in the Ramayana here into this exploration of the Mahabharata, because up until now none of the essays had actually looked for any parallels between the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And for the most part, if you actually think about it, growing up also as Indians, as Hindus, we are never actually told to actively critically compare the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, because the Ramayana is, at least to me, according to me, the Ramayana is about an idealized story, about an idealized man, an idealized woman, an idealized society, where basically there is everything kind of ends in a perfect way. And yes, the Uttarakanda is there, which kind of throws all of this, what I just said, back onto my face. So but excluding the Uttarakanda, it's about what kind of ideals a person chooses to live up to. Rama chose to live up to the ideal of being a good king, a great king to his subjects, at the cost of being a bad husband to his wife. And yes, I know that many of you don't think the Uttarakanda was part of the original epic, but the critical edition by the Baroda Institute does include the Uttarakanda. So for all intents and purposes, I am considering that it is part of the original Ramayana as well. Now, in this essay on Draupadi, Irawati Karve also kind of compares Sita versus Draupadi, specifically in terms of how society expects women to behave, which is how Sita's character is, versus how they don't expect women to behave, which is how Draupadi's character is. And interestingly, how Draupadi behaves is not Draupadi's doing in any way. Draupadi is, for the most part, based on what I have read so far, she is the most devoted wife, she's the most loving wife, she cares for her husband, she cares for her Kunti, she strives to make their life easy when they are in the forest. And it's only once that she, along with Bhima, they berate and they scold Yudhishthira for his utter foolishness at gambling away everything and everyone. But the thing about Draupadi is, people point at her and say that, oh, she is a promiscuous woman because she has 5 husbands, and if there is even a statement during the Sabha, the game of dice, when she's about to be disrobed, when one of the members of the Kuru party, they basically say that if someone sleeps with more than one man, it's as good as being a slut, so she can sleep with all of us also, right? So it's kind of like a very negative and derogatory comment that's made about her. So a lot of the comments about Draupadi being very sexually promiscuous, about her being angry, about her being kind of the reason why the Kurus actually fought amongst themselves, so all of these things are sort of forced upon her by the men in the entire epic, and rather than Draupadi herself being responsible for something like this. So it's very interesting to see how in this essay on Draupadi, we look at the parallels between the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and look at what does being a woman really mean, and how being a woman has actually changed or remained the same throughout these many thousands of years. After this, we come to the essay on the Palace of Maya, and in this we have a really interesting exploration. So if you have read the more critical versions of the Mahabharata, and I'm talking not just about the BORI Critical Edition, but just more nuanced versions of the Mahabharata rather than just the plain stories that we get, you will notice that how a lot of sages and a lot of kings seem to copulate with and have children with animals or with semi-divine creatures like Gandharvas, Apsaras, and so on. And so there is this belief that all of these are either kind of like either bestiality, that is human animal sexual relations, or something like between mortal and semi-divine, or mortal and divine with a deity kind of relationships. But in this particular essay, Irawati Karve considers the perspective that perhaps all of these names were given to the indigenous communities that were present in India at the time when this particular epic was actually going on, or perhaps when during the time of the Aryan invasion, if you believe the Aryan invasion theory. So we look at who Maya could have been, where could he have been, what kind of community could he have come from, and what kind of skills had he brought into towards making this palace and making Indraprastha possible. But even before we reach all of this, we have an intense discussion that is through the essay. We have an intense discussion of the necessity of actually burning the Khandava forest, because without the burning of the forest, the city and the palace could not have been constructed, and about the necessity, or about whether the necessity of having to burn the forest could have been justified, because we see both Krishna and Arjuna uh, actively advocating for burning this forest under the guise of, oh, Agni asked us to do it, and also enjoying the entire process of killing all these creatures and being absolutely ruthless about it. So we explore the concept of genocide and the Holocaust of indigenous populations, local and native to this land, and how it's sort of like how there's a forced Sanskritization, you could say. It's very important to consider that that in the Mahabharata, Krishna operated as a man, as a mortal, and he made mistakes, and there is a possibility that he could have been needlessly ruthless towards innocent creatures, towards innocent forests, towards innocent animals, towards innocent tribal people who were just trying to survive. After this, we have an essay on Drona and Ashwatthama and the role of, and it's an interesting take on caste within the Mahabharata universe, and about what it means to be a Brahmin versus what it means to be a Kshatriya, and what it means, like Drona and Ashwatthama, to kind of cross over and blur the boundaries between their hereditary caste of being Brahmanas versus their occupational. I wouldn't say occupational caste, but it is definitely an occupational lifestyle of being Kshatriyas. So it's a very interesting take on the development of caste within India as a whole and within the Mahabharata universe, and we confront a lot of the moral dilemmas that Drona and Ashwatthama themselves face, and how they actually navigate these moral issues, especially when it comes to their role, which technically as Brahmanas was supposed to be pacifists, but they end up becoming some of the most powerful weapons in the hands of Duryodhana, right? So that's a very interesting essay as well. After this, we have an essay on Karna, and this essay actually I felt, to be very honest, both the essays on Ashwatthama and Karna were, I feel, needlessly harsh. By Irawati Karve. She does put up really interesting hypotheses and theories of her own, but I do feel that she is needlessly harsh. I did feel some of the things that she mentioned about these characters were a little, at least they don't sit well with me. In order to be open-minded, I'm going to be okay with her opinion, although also holding space for my own opinions, which differ drastically from hers. So in Karna's book, we look at Karna's desire to be identified as a Kshatriya and to be given that identity by the people who he knows are denying him his place in life, his due in life. And it's about how perhaps how Karna did not actually care about the material benefits that came with the recognition that he's actually a Kshatriya and he's a royal, but perhaps just the quest of finding oneself. Then we have an essay on Krishna, and this essay is also really interesting because this particular essay discusses how the Mahabharata Krishna versus the post Mahabharata Krishna, the images, the kind of reputation and the stories and just the entire brand, I would say, of Krishna pre-Mahabharata, during Mahabharata and post-Mahabharata, how they're so drastically different, and how Krishna perhaps could have been elevated from the status of a mere man who was actually an excellent strategist, a very powerful warrior, a good friend, a good family man. Yes, all those things considering, but he was still a man and a mortal. And how he could have been elevated from this position to that of divinity, and how the whole bhakti movement actually came into being, and how that bhakti movement and that bhakti narrative has just sort of taken over and overshadowed and even kind of pushed out of the limelight the original essence of Krishna as a man and how he functioned and his beliefs within the Mahabharata world. So that's a very interesting essay, and to a large part I do agree with a lot of the things that she says in this particular essay, because even when I'm reading the critical edition of the Mahabharata, there are a lot of areas where it feels like if Krishna were truly aware of his divinity, then he would not be doing things that kind of defy logic, because uh, the post Mahabharata Krishna, like she mentions in this book, is so much more loving and accepting and just very generous. So that image it just does not match at all. So it's definitely a very interesting essay. Finally, we end this book with a final essay called "The End of a Yuga," where Irawati Karve explores how culture in India, the socio-cultural political climate of India, changed dramatically after the Mahabharata period, when Janamejaya ascended the throne. That kind of brought about an end of an era, where a lot of the social values, a lot of the cultural beliefs, a lot of the practices of the time, they kind of ebbed away into oblivion, and a completely new set of social mores took their place. And to a large part, that it can be said that because a lot of people started coming in from outside of the country, from regions outside of where Hastinapura, Panchala, Indraprastha, and Dwarka, and so on are there. From outside of those areas, when people started to come in, they brought with them their own set of cultural belief systems, which kind of merged and mingled with our social systems at that period of time, and therefore changed everything completely drastically. Of how a lot of these myths that were still kind of they were still shared orally through stories, a lot of these characters, for example, like Krishna himself, were adopted as gods by the newcomers, but they were given completely new backstories and different personality quirks and characteristics based on what values these new communities valued above everything else. So it's a very interesting end, and it does make you wonder how life would have been like in India had those values of during the Mahabharata time, if they had continued. Yes, there would have been a lot of patriarchal, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, value systems that would have plagued the world. But then again, those issues are still persisting and prevailing even today, irrespective of the fact that the Mahabharata culture is no longer in existence. But at the same time, there were a lot of instances where women were granted a lot more freedom, where you do see even divine acknowledgement in the form of Mohini, for example, Mohini and Iravan, for example. Where transness was accepted and normalized, where a lot of good things also happened, where there was a lot more ecological consciousness and the consideration of nature as divine. So those things are unfortunately lost as well, because today's world is just a lot more toxic in a way. It also has to actually kind of look at us, put a mirror in front of ourselves, and to ask us whether we are actually practicing our religious traditions, our cultural traditions in the right way or not. In the sense that now everything has become about believing what a guru or a priest or a family elder says, without questioning, without debating, without posing counter questions. Whereas everything, even during and before the Mahabharata time, was all about questioning the things that were told by the elders, by religious heads, by community leaders, by memory keepers, by storytellers, and basically questioning and critically thinking as to what values and what lessons you want to learn from people who are trying to guide you. And there's a beautiful quote that she also uses in the end. Before the Mahabharata, a teacher was always supposed to say to his pupil at the end, "Whatever is good in me, that alone should you imitate, nothing else." But our saint poets like Dhyaneshwar, Tukaram, and Ramdas advised a pupil to follow his teacher with blind devotion. So this shows that there was a huge stress culturally, socially, to actually question and engage and critically think yourself, and then adopt the things that sit well with you. Overall, I really did enjoy this book. There are a lot of new perspectives. There are a lot of perspectives that I got from this book, and there were a lot of perspectives that actually matched with what I have myself, which I've made in the form of notes in all of my Mahabharata books. But there were also sections where I did not did not agree with Irawati Karve, where I felt like if I were to be writing these essays, but the way I would write them, the way I would end them, the way I would phrase them would be completely different. So all in all, it's a very engaging book. It's a very thought-provoking book. If you are particularly interested in the Mahabharata and engaging with the Mahabharata critically, then this is a book that you definitely should read. But once again, don't take everything she says as sort of like your Bible, right? Critically engage with it, add your own notes, think about it yourself, whether this is something that sits with you or not, and if it goes against any of the beliefs that you have been brought up with, consider whether you can make space to accommodate some of the things that she has said alongside the beliefs that you have. So yeah, Yuganta, Irawati Karve, definitely a great book, so go ahead and pick it up. And if you have read this book, please let me know in the comments below what you thought of her work and of her essays, and whether you agree with her or not. Alright, thank you so much for watching my video. I'll see you next time. Until syntax. Bye bye.